Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I hope you are doing well, having a peaceful week. My name is Ebony Johnson. I serve as the director of the Den Black Film Festival Institute. And on behalf of my assistant director, Agatha Bynes, who you'll see a little bit later, we welcome you to our State of the Industry event conversation. We're so excited to have you and so excited to have our guest. COVID-19, it was the reckoning that we were not prepared for, and it's changed the way that we have socially interacted and globally communicated. As many other economic markets, the film and entertainment industry has been impacted by this virus. And tonight we're here to have a conversation about just ways that we can navigate through this pandemic and possible strategies to implement in the production of and the way we go through filming in post-pandemic times. So I want you to feel involved in this conversation. Feel free to ask questions. Use the comment function below on Facebook. If you're seeing us, feel free to ask questions to our guests. This is an open conversation, and we're excited to have you, and we're excited to have our guests. Our first topic tonight is going to be around financing and funds, and possible ways to think about financing your project through this pandemic and even after. So we have a wonderful pair of guests, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background about both of them. So first up, we have Kareem Ahmad. He is a writer, cultural strategist, husband, and father, member of the Guild of Future Architects, and director of the Outreach and Inclusion Program at the Sundance Institute. At the Sundance Institute, Kareem designs emerging artist outreach initiatives and professional development opportunities, and leads a coalition of allied organizations working to build a just and beautiful future for our artist communities. He was the creator and showrunner of the iconic sci-fi series Future States, and can be found on Twitter at the Kareem Ahmad. And our second guest is Sean Anthony II. He's a filmmaker, an award-winning filmmaker from Harlem, New York. His earliest works as a filmmaker came when he edited videos at the age of 10 of his own youth football games. After earning a full academic scholarship to the University of Rhode Island, his love for filmmaking came after he created his first short documentary, The Movement. Since then, he took on the mantra to inform and inspire through his films. He now has directed 9 short films and produced 2. His most recent film, Showtime, was selected for 47 film festivals, and he was named the best new director by the Hip Hop Film Festival. He is currently an apprentice with NBC's The Blacklist. And so I'm happy to bring on our guest, Sean. Welcome, Sean.
What's going on?
How are you, Kareem?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you all.
I get to have you both.
Nice to meet you, Sean.
Nice to meet you, Kareem.
Where are you? I'm really intrigued with what's going on in the background
I
know. Oh yeah.
And the mask, I love it.
I know.
Very timely for our event. My first question off the bat for both of you is, how have you seen the industry evolve in response to COVID-19?
Do you want to start, Sean?
Yeah, I guess I'll begin.
Sure.
The way I've seen the industry just evolve and kind of react to all the protocols, everything that's happening as response to coronavirus, it's been very interesting. Everybody is kind of hesitant right now to really go full throttle into production. So everybody's been really easing into, making sure everyone's safe, and it's also an environment that everyone is comfortable in. And yeah, that's where we are right now. Through my experiences in film right now, is that everybody is just really trying to make sure it's done right, and it's done to the best of the ability during these unfortunate circumstances.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Sean has said. I think from my vantage point, it's weird. I mean, like everything has changed, and in some ways, like very little has changed, right? I mean, I think like to the subject of financing and to the subject of like emerging filmmakers that are trying to launch their work, like in many ways, like the lack of access for like folks from historically marginalized communities is exacerbated because so much of what artists and what artists and anyone from historically marginalized communities, particularly like folks from Black and Brown communities, the lack of access and the sort of lack of ability or opportunity or restriction from opportunities to be able to generate professional development opportunities or to generate just the kind of wealth that is going to be able to allow for a safety net in times like these. Like that's all exacerbated by the fact that there has been this kind of shutdown and things are starting to ease up to a certain degree, I guess, as folks are kind of moving back into production. But, as we're sort of in the midst of, as we're in the midst of a pandemic and we're also in the midst of, the industry sort of like, reckoning with its racist and unjust sort of past, there's sort of like this performative allyship that's happening between like a lot of studios and brands. And I'm sure everyone, who's watching this or everyone's participating in this conversation has seen this, where it's like, folks want to like present that they are allies in a certain way. But then when it comes time to actually, what does that mean in terms of creating opportunities for new filmmakers from marginalized communities? They have those like, like 3 Black filmmakers like in their virtual Rolodex that they will call to give opportunities. But for folks that are still trying to build a career, that haven't sort of made that first feature that's going to be a great calling card for, a studio or a financier or whoever, the ability or the interest in taking chances on, newer filmmakers who may even be, proven with like other short films, web series, whatever it is, there is still that unwillingness to be able to sort of, take a quote unquote risk on somebody who's like an emerging talent. And so in many ways, like that dynamic has become exacerbated, even though there is still sort of like a desire to, whether it's altruistic, whether it's legitimate or whether it's performative, to be able to sort of like highlight the stories from marginalized communities.
Mm-hmm.
Great point.
Yes.
Great point. Absolutely.
I mean, working in a program where I think like a lot of the folks that we work with, at least in my program at Sundance, is like our bread and butter is like supporting emerging artists. And like our goals are largely to sort of like create those opportunities for emerging artists to make that first major work. And so like, I think that's just why like from this vantage point where we're like engaging with a lot of those artists like on a daily basis, it's like, okay, like even folks that like had a project that was maybe ready to go, like maybe at that tipping point where they were going to be able to raise the financing to get the thing off the ground, there was this sort of like shutdown, and then like folks are getting laid off, and the folks that are getting called back into those employment opportunities are like, not representative of like where we were sort of starting to move towards.
Yeah. So do you see this as this time really as retroactive to the progress that was being made before the pandemic?
Yeah, I think, basically what Kareem was saying is along the lines of like, those opportunities that were presented before for all these filmmakers are now, somewhat gone as far as the independent route, trying to go to festivals, trying to, build that momentum to, finally get that opportunity to get your film to the right audience member. Those opportunities have kind of dwindled now that we're doing the virtual scape of everything. And I think for a lot of filmmakers, that opportunity to go in person, to kind of pitch yourself and, who you are as a filmmaker, those opportunities may not be there anymore. And I think that may be the biggest thing that's really hurting everybody. I know it's definitely hurting me. And speaking to my other colleagues, that's one of the things that's kind of discouraging. Like, all right, I want to create this project, but then what do I do? And that's probably the biggest thing that's, a little discouraging. But places like Sundance that are providing those opportunities, those are some of those things that need to be followed up by everyone. I mean, especially to keep independent and new ideas and new creatives in the works for the future of filmmaking.
Definitely.
I appreciate you saying that, Sean. Yeah, it's, I think what you said there is like definitely something that's really poignant, and like I'm really seeing it within the artist communities that we're working with too. Is that like, there was this wave of like supported films that were supposed to exhibit at film festivals, through the spring and summer, and either they've made sort of transitions to go into a virtual film festival, or they tried to do some combination of like socially distanced in-person screenings, whether that's at drive-ins or the way that TIFF did it, which like I still don't fully understand, but it just creates, I mean, while that does help maybe sort of build audience to a certain degree, I think part of the challenge is that like, everyone is, sort of struggling under the weight of being able to sustain themselves and their families, and then to be able to sort of like also engage with a virtual film festival and to be able to like promote their work and make connections with industry and things like that. It's such a challenging thing to do. And I think, like ultimately, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think like, the industry is a lazy sort of place, because like there are these sort of like structures that are in place by which films get acquired, by which like studio executives discover new talent. And like so much of that I think is like very much based on like this sort of like in-person festival. And so like the paradigm or like the precedent for like being able to like feel comfortable meeting a new filmmaker at a virtual film festival, acquiring a film out of a virtual film festival, it's still so new. And I think a lot of folks are really struggling with like, what does it look like to acquire, distribute, or finance a film through someone that you're engaging with at a virtual film festival? So it's like, I think that has just made it really difficult for like filmmakers, from who are emerging, or also even just mid-career, that have maybe made a feature and are trying to make that next feature. It makes it really difficult for them to be able to build audience, to build partnerships, because there has been such a reliance on that like in-person space.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
Yeah. Well, what advice do you have, or any strategies that you both might have in times of like these for filmmakers who are wanting to fund their project or even take their project into production, and I don't know, in both spaces for nonfiction and fiction and narrative filmmaking? Are there any suggestions, resources?
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion and just some of the stuff that I've been doing is just find ways to just shoot, just go out there and create. And I think the means of money should never really discourage any artist. I know it's a big component of it, but these are the times. Although you might be financially handicapped by the situation, what's happening, but creatively find ways to be able to just create, find ways to continue to do stuff. Maybe it's now the time to be able to showcase your old works to other people, find people that may want to showcase your already works that have already been done. And yeah, I guess that's the best advice from my perspective. And as a filmmaker, is just, now's the time to just find ways to create under these circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that advice 100%. I mean, I think like, especially now as sort of, access to traditional modes of financing or traditional modes of like releasing your work are less available in terms of like film festivals. There is something interesting about the fact that like, like if you have a piece of work, like, folks are definitely watching stuff, right? Because like folks aren't, attending film festivals in person, they're taking a lot of meetings. Like that's what I hear from a lot of the financiers we're talking to and executives and distributors, is like, they're taking more meetings than ever, right? So like folks are getting through their reading piles, like all the scripts that they have backed up over the years, they're reading that stuff, they're taking meetings, they're making development deals at least. I mean, I think like, at least on the fiction side, there's not a lot of production kind of moving back into the world. There's definitely like a lot of documentary filmmakers that are still like out there and shooting. And I think, whether or not like someone decides to kind of go back out into the world and shoot something, it's obviously like a very deeply personal choice based on sort of what you feel safe and comfortable doing. I know I personally have a lot of anxiety about it when I talk to the artists that we're supporting, and some of them are like, yeah, I don't have a choice, I have to be out in the world like telling this story. Like I get like a ton of anxiety just like hearing them say those stories. It's like I fear for them, I feel for their lives. And it's one of those things where it's like, particularly in the doc world, I think like folks are more willing to take those risks because there's a little bit more of like a, sort of a tradition of like, well, like we're going to sort of take a camera and go into a war zone, right? And like, this is no different, right? Like, so there is a little bit of that kind of tradition in the nonfiction space that I think is not there as much in the fiction world. But I mean, I think, I would say to whatever degree you as artists feel able to continue to create, utilize that space, whether it's like, I have a little bit more time to write. I'm going to, if I'm able to find the sort of emotional and creative space to do that, because obviously God knows, like we're all sort of like increasingly emotionally drained by everything that we're enduring and all the injustice that is exacerbating around us and the personal strain of living under this pandemic for several months, particularly if you're like coming from a position of like being a caregiver or, being sort of financially impacted by the pandemic. And those are not the best conditions to make your best work necessarily, or maybe they are if you come from an emotional space where you can channel that into your work. So if you're able to do that, by all means, like channel that into your work, create. And if you feel safe or you've been able to put together the right precautions to be able to sort of be out in the world shooting, then do that. I mean, I have a documentary filmmaker who I've supported for several years who is still shooting, and he's actually developed some really comprehensive like COVID safety protocols. And there's definitely like frameworks that folks have been developing for that, which are really strong. So I would say, particularly if you're sort of at a stage where you're, sort of just sort of developing a body of work, you're at a more emerging stage, there's definitely ways that you can sort of use the resources of what you have available to be able to tell stories in sort of safe, like socially distanced kinds of ways. I think there's an opportunity to sort of lean into creativity and kind of think about how do you use those limitations to be more creative. And then recognizing that because everything is being distributed virtually, there are opportunities to discover and build audience in ways that could be really, really meaningful. And while sort of traditional sources of financing are not, really strong right now, I will say that like a lot of, from what I've been seeing, foundations and nonprofit funders are like really shifting grants around in a way that is designed to support the needs of the moment, even if they're non-traditional based on like the history of the way that these foundations have granted previously. And I know like Sundance is not really a financier. I mean, we have a couple of granting funds, but a lot of what we're doing is sort of creative and professional development support through fellowships. But, for the granting monies that we do have, we are really shifting our work towards rapid response, artist relief, supporting the work of artists in a less transactional, like project-based way. Our doc fund is definitely still funding documentaries on a project basis. And we have artist-facing grants that we're trying to get off the ground right now. There's a coalition of organizations that came together through the sort of group name Artist Relief. And so if you go to artistrelief.org, you can apply for artist relief funding that is not tied to a specific project. It's basically just, you can say like, my creativity and professional development has been impacted by COVID. I want to apply for a relief grant. They're giving grants up to $5,000. And, to my understanding, that's totally unrestricted. So you could use it to like pay rent, or you could use it to put towards a project. So foundations are being responsive in that way. The other thing, and I'm less connected to this world, but I hear that, for folks that work a lot in the philanthropy space, that there's a lot more like individual donors that are actually like putting way more money into social causes, including the arts, like, in a much more like dramatically increased way than they have previously. So like, even though like commercial, like structures of financing, like studios and financiers are not necessarily as accessible, foundations, individual donors, like, those communities are definitely like putting more money into artist relief and into social causes.
Yeah,
I can tell. So I think there is something to be explored there if that's an avenue that is personally available to anybody.
Yeah. Switching a little bit to the topic of, I don't know, I guess this pandemic has definitely shifted the way in which we, the traditions, I guess, of our past and the traditional thinking and rhetoric of how to produce media and the ways to distribute media, especially with what we were talking about, virtual film festivals occurring now. So do you feel that the strategies are, I guess, the proactiveness for filmmakers and the way that they at least in the past used to think about funding their films or planning their productions with their distribution in mind, or understanding like I want to go to film festivals and I want to get possibly on Amazon or some type of streaming services. Do you think that type of rhetoric is still important and viable, or do you think that there should be different mentalities in the way we're thinking about our work and the way we finance our work for then it to be seen by audiences? And I hope that question makes sense.
I think I understand what you're saying. I mean, it's just sort of like, should you still approach the creation and the production of a film with sort of the destination in mind?
Mm-hmm,
is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah.
I mean, I always feel like, it's up to an artist to sort of design their own vision of what success looks like for them. And I think that can take any number of different forms. Like, for some folks, and we have fellows that are like this, like, there's less of a pressure to be an internal pressure to be like, sort of like commercially successful. And it's more like, I have stories to tell. I want to be able to raise enough money, amass enough resources, get the right kind of partnerships to be able to tell these stories. And then I'm going to like make my money teaching, right? Like that's how I'm going to like, get my health insurance and like pay my bills, right? And so like, there's definitely like fellows that we've worked with where like that is their vision of success. And then there's other folks that are like, my goal is to be like commercially successful in a really specific way. Because, and there's no shade towards that. It's like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be supported financially by the art that you're creating, whatever that looks like. Whether that's something more independent or whether it's something that's more of the popular arts. But I always encourage folks to sort of think about when they're launching a project, like what they want that project to do in the world. And I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to that. But I think like things have shifted, for the moment, right? And I think like, I'm not going to say like when things get back to normal, because I think like we would all agree that like the back to normal like didn't work for the majority of folks that, are in this world basically. And so like when we talk about, getting back to normal, we're actually talking about getting through to a new and better normal is how I like to talk about it. And leveraging this moment that we have to actually like reinvent systems. And that's like, when Ebony, you were mentioning like the work that we do sort of like leading a coalition of allied organizations, like a lot of that is like specifically for, bringing organizations like, the Blacklist or like Black House Foundation or like Center for Asian American Media or like, NALEAP, bringing these organizations together and saying like, how do we leverage the space that we have as artist support organizations to design something that's more equitable so that hopefully there are more opportunities for artists to be able to sustain themselves off of their work. On the terms of whatever they've designed success as. But all that to say, like, I do think it's good for artists to be sort of thinking through, like, what do I want this piece of work to do in the world? And then I think just kind of like right sizing your development and production and financing process to be in accordance with that. Like, for example, like if you're doing something that's sort of like a personal film for like your community or for yourself, you might not necessarily need to sort of raise as much money to get like, a much more elevated version of like production values for the thing if it's something that's much more personal. But if you are looking to have like a really solid like impact campaign or have it be seen like it's a documentary for public television distribution or something like that, like that definitely sort of carries with it like, okay, I need to make sure that this is the type of thing that would be accepted on those distribution platforms because being nationally broadcast is important to the kind of change that I want to effect with this particular film. So I think it really just kind of depends on like what the goal is that the filmmaker has set out for themselves.
Got you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kareem covered just about everything in regards to that I would have said at least. And, especially as filmmakers, you should go in with somewhat of an idea of what is the purpose of this film? Why do I want to tell this story? And I think, then you go into the transition. All right, what outlets, what is this for? What can this be used as? But I think first and foremost, you should have your own purpose and why you're creating it for sure.
Sure. Sean, do you want to talk a little bit about your personal strategies for raising funds, at least for the films you made in the past?
Yeah, so my last film, Showtime, which I think you guys were the first festival that I actually showed it at last year. Yeah, my approach to raising the money for my film was asking people from my community first. We had a crowdfunding campaign on Seed and Spark, which I believe lasted for 45 days. Yeah, so we raised the money through locally, asking people in person, online, virtually, and then we went into production for the film. Raising the money was difficult, but we kind of had like somewhat of a gauge of like, all right, we can make this film with this amount of money. We didn't get the full amount, but we got just enough to make the film, and then we were able to work with what we had. Just to add on to some of the distribution and just how we showed the film, my approach as the filmmaker was I just want to make sure this film is shown to as many people as possible. So we submitted it to tons of film festivals, and what we ended up doing was reaching out to these festivals and explaining why this film needs to be shown there. And we actually ended up getting in 49 film festivals internationally and nationally. We didn't get into the major film festivals like Sundance or New York Film Festival or even Tribeca, but we actually were able to show it to more people. I know for sure we showed it to more people than we would have just showing it just at Sundance or TIFF. And yeah, that was my goal as the filmmaker, just to make sure that this story was told, people saw the story, and any opportunity I got to tell people in person why this story was important to me, I was able to do that.
Awesome. That's really cool. I guess as far as a conversation around equity, both Sean and Kareem, I don't know if you feel that equity must start first with filmmakers, or do you feel like there are organizations, I know we were talking about, I forgot the term you used, but almost like pseudo altruistic type of organizations that are out there. But do you feel that type of equity starts first with filmmakers and what they are seeking and demanding from certain organizations, or do you think that it has to be a collaborative effort with people who do have that type of financial resource in effort to support filmmakers?
Yeah, do you mean performative allyship that I was talking about earlier? Like not like genuine allyship, but like performative allyship, right? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really complex question. I mean, like, you know, like the unfortunate thing, like the really shitty thing about like any kind of like change that has ever occurred in certainly American society is that like, you know, the burden of that change has always rested on the shoulders of like the people that are most marginalized, right? So it's like those are the folks that have like, you know, carried, you know, all of the major social movements that have like created any kind of progressive change in this country, right? And it's like, it's ultimately because I think, you know, this country is founded on like, you asked me about systems, so I'm going to go back to like talking about capitalism. It's just like, you know, like capitalism is founded on like, you know, the American version of capitalism is like especially violent, right? And has like especially violent origins that are like literally like built off of like the lives of like theft of land and slavery and murder and genocide. And so it's like this is what our economic system is based on, right? It's like based on like an extractive model, right? All of American capitalism is inherently extractive, where the idea is like, how do I get as much as possible by giving as little as possible back, right? Like this is sort of like the model that our industry is based on too, right? And it's like, it's not unique. It's just, this is the nature of the way that our economy works in this country, is that like you are supposed to get as much as possible for as little as possible. And like, this is particularly challenging for producers, right? Where you're supposed to be the resident capitalist on set, and your job is to try and like squeeze every dollar out of your production to sort of put as much value on the screen as possible. And I think, you know, I've been fortunate enough to sort of be in rooms and work with and sort of, you know, put forward and gather the ideas of like some amazing producers that have been doing this work long before I have, you know, to be able to sort of bring forward like more like indigenous wisdom, which is like, you know, framing a production from the standpoint of like, how do we approach the arts ecosystem from a position of abundance, where like your wealth is actually being measured by having enough to give away. And like, how do you actually, you know, have a double bottom line to your production where like you were designing for, you know, financial success of the project, because like everyone wants to be able to, enjoy the fruits of their labor and like then distribute those resources equitably amongst the folks that worked on that project. But also at the same time, how are you designing the bottom line that is like, a bottom line that is serving community and is restorative to communities, or is restorative to the earth and not extractive to the earth in a certain way. So like, there are movements of artists that are trying to sort of build out more values-based production models in that way. And I think, unfortunately, going back to like what your original question was, like that burden is unfortunately on the artist, because like these structures, these industry structures were built in a way that is antithetical to that. And so, as with any structure of social change or societal change within this country, the burden has historically rested on the shoulders of those most marginalized, right? So like artists from historically marginalized communities, right? Like mainly like Black and brown artists, artists with disabilities, like folks that have the least access to, the traditional structures of like Hollywood and, all the various manifestations of it. And so, I think the way that I at least look at my role within Sundance, and I know the way that Sundance, looks at its role within the independent film scene and or community, and the way that we sort of work with other allied organizations that have deeper roots within specific communities of artists that are historically marginalized. How do we alleviate that burden from individual artists as much as possible, and actually, try and take upon our role as artist supporters, not just to support the individual artists, but increasingly how to build more systemic change across the industry to that point of like, let's not go back to a broken system. Let's go through to something that is going to be more just or more equitable, because, we know that the previous model was not sustainable. And so like, as much as we're all suffering right now, like let's utilize this moment to actually redesign something that is less broken than what we came from. And so I think, from the standpoint of artists, I think like there's no right answer in my mind, whether it's like, sort of secede from the traditional Hollywood structure and try and develop something on your own, or sort of try and utilize this moment, right, to say like, this is a moment where like, big companies are performing allyship, right? So like, I'm going to utilize that as like a form of reparations and say like, you know what, like I'm going to take advantage of that and say like, okay, sure, like I will take these resources in order to advance my project, right? There's nothing wrong with either of those models. And I think like, in reality, the only way that it'll work is sort of a combination of the two, because like obviously, toppling capitalism doesn't happen overnight, but like, there are ways to create structures that are more values based. And so like, nonprofit structures, cooperative structures, collaborative structures. There's a lot of like artist collectives that are forming that are doing a lot of the work that even nonprofits that have been in the artist community for many, many years have not been able to do. And so it speaks to the work that the sort of like collective of artists in non-traditional structures can do on their own to impact change. But I don't know, it's a long-winded way of saying that I think like it has to be both. But I think there are ways right now that artists, and if we're doing our jobs right in partnership with organizations like us, can sort of hopefully design models where artists don't have to get the permission or as much permission from these sort of traditional structures to be able to get the resources to make work, complete work, release work, be equitably remunerated for that work.
Yeah, definitely. Sean, do you have anything to add?
No, I completely agree. This is an opportunity. Like I loved what you said about reparations. This is the opportunity now to apply for that program, to take, for lack of words, shoot your shot. This is like my dad said, this may never be an opportunity like this again. So this is the moment, live in it if you're able to by any means. And, why not? Why not you? Why not this be your opportunity to break in, to change someone's lives, to change your own life? So, I think Kareem has said some amazing thing. He has so much more insight than I do, but he's a resource for people. This right here, these opportunities that this film festival put together is what we need. These are the type of conversations that need to happen on a daily basis.
I want to thank you both. You both are wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Kareem and Sean. You can find them on Twitter. I think Kareem is at the Kareem Amon, and Sean, you are Sean.
Sean Antoine I on all social media. Yep.
All social media. Awesome. Thank you both.
Great to meet you, Sean.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'll definitely be in contact with you, Kareem. We definitely have to talk.
Please do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great to see you too, Ebony.
Good to see
Thank
you.
you, Ebony. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. Be safe. Be well.
All right. Have a blessed night, everybody.
5. All right. Agatha, I think we're going to switch over to you. I'm sorry. Feel free to take over.
Thank you, Ebony. Thanks to all who are joining us tonight. Thanks to Sean and Kareem for offering so much great insight and observation about the state of the industry. My name is Agatha Bynes, and I am Assistant Director of the Denton Black Film Festival Institute, and I have the great joy of working with folks like Ebony and the amazing creatives and folks in the industry who are with us tonight. This is the segment that focuses on production. And when the pandemic hit us, media makers in all stages of production suddenly were confronting a new creative landscape, new safety concerns, new obstacles, new uncertainties, and I hope also new opportunities, networks, and modes of production. I am really delighted that we'll get to hear from media makers and organizational representatives about how folks in the industry are adapting to these changes. I will offer an abbreviated bio for folks so that we can get into the conversation. Tia Williams is a Texas native, and in addition to writing short stories and screenplays, has ventured into film and video, including her web series Gentrified, which garnered national attention for the way it captures financial and emotional effects of gentrification. Lindsay Ashley comes to us from the Texas Film Commission. Lindsay has worked with the commission since 2005, serving as a location scout and production consultant, and now is deputy director. Heather Trulieb is the current president of the Dallas Screenwriters Association, and in addition to screenwriting, has acted and been a crew member and rep for director Ebony Johnson of LDJ Productions. And Calvin J. Walker is an award-winning Texas-based filmmaker. And in addition to his media making, has also created and runs WM Casting Group. And I know as well that he is about to be a published writer. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. And I'm really excited to learn from you about the state of the industry. And yes, this is great. So we have a lot of voices. I hope to take a step back and really let you all take the lead in the conversation. But I will start with a more general question about the state of the industry and how you have experienced changes in it and responses from the industry after the pandemic. Tia, why don't you start us off?
I was actually waiting on someone else to go. No worries. I think for me, oddly enough, as an indie filmmaker, a lot of the changes or things that I have been experiencing have been a bit of a plus. And I know that that has not been the case for everyone else. But I think it's because there is such a hunger for content at the moment, and so many of us who are eager to kind of work, that the opportunities have just been kind of pouring in. And although we're seeing some effects from the pandemic that, of course, are going to last long term as it pertains to how we will deal with production, I am excited that we kind of have a bit of a spotlight at the moment, and have more of an ear and a voice to get out there.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We're all trying to be too polite, right?
Go ahead, Lindsay.
Go ahead, Kelvin.
I agree with you. It has been so, like, we're in this double pandemic situation, especially if you're like a creator of color. So like you have the coronavirus and then you have the racial reckoning. And so from my perspective, there's been been this onslaught of opportunities because all of a sudden somebody said, you know what, Black voices matter. And like now we're hashtags and we're t-shirts and we're bumper stickers and, people want to hear us all of a sudden. And so for me, I've gotten an opportunity to have great coverage, read by some TV writers, because there was a situation where they said, if you're an aspiring writer, send us your stuff. You want to give you coverage, and so I took advantage of all those wonderful opportunities and got some great feedback. But from a coronavirus standpoint, it's been pretty cool. From my placement, I've done 2 projects. You could probably say 3. One was a passion piece that could be considered a project, but wasn't really like a whole production, if you will. One was on Zoom, and one was actually on set. And the Zoom project is probably my favorite thing that I've ever done in my whole life. And it was one of those things where, as indie filmmakers, we're always up against the rock and the hard place. So our process is never cushy, but I think that it's pushed us, right? It's pushed us past what the system has told us has to be there in order for there to be a film. It pushed us past, what all the norms were, right? And we all began to rethink what creativity was inside of the pandemic. But I also think that coming out of it, we're going to have people who are more they're more energized to do things in different ways, because now, the blindfold of what has to happen on a set or in a film has been taken down, and we are able to see things with new eyes.
I can go ahead and jump in. I have been at the film office trying to work with our team at the Film Commission and the state in order to try to make it safe for people to go back to work. And so my summer has been really interesting and very busy. We saw that the state was trying to open up the industries in Texas kind of one by one and incrementally. And being an industry of problem solvers and people who think on their toes, we really wanted to make sure that media production professionals were included and considered as those that can do so safely and responsibly. And so it's been really nice to see people get back to work on set. It started out with really small productions, a lot of commercials. We had a TV series that had 1 episode left to get done. And so they did that for about 3 weeks in August. And now we're starting to see some of our larger shows that have been prepping for the last month to month and a half get back up and start production this month. So that's a huge step in the right direction towards getting our crews and our casts back to work. And so we've been helping to communicate the changes as far as what to expect when people do get back on set. It looks very different. It feels very different. There's added time and added costs just to make sure that when you do get up and running, you're making the most of everyone's time and doing so safely. And you can try to avoid having to shut back down in case there was someone to get sick or if there was a potential for an outbreak. So there's new positions on set. Safety compliance officer is a new position that all the productions have. And there's new protocols as far as testing and utilizing PPE and zone and pod structures. And so we've just been trying to help everyone understand how these new ways of doing things can be applied to their projects.
Thanks, Lindsay. And Heather, what would you like to add?
Sure. Pretty much all of you, I think we're all kind of in the same boat. When this first happened, being a writer, I was like, it's a kind of a great opportunity to just get busy and start writing. Those of us that have other jobs, I've been the president of the DSA for, I think, since 2011. And, you know, we spread the word and have table reads and scene reads and speakers in. So this has been a weird time for us. We've had to do our meetings on Zoom, which in the beginning went real well because there's people that cannot attend because of work or they can't get the time. So it worked out pretty good, but people get tired of it and they're wanting to get back. So we're going to go live and in person this month on the 20th and do a table read. I've kept up with all the protocols and everything, and I would love to say that I'm going to start filming sometime this year, but got to raise the money first. But I followed the protocols for, opening and everything, and who knows, that might be even an itch I may start to have to get back together and be a crew member to get a little working again. But yeah, I think this has all taught us that, you got to make it about the time. And a lot of stuff that has been written is, I write like pretty much cross diversity. So, right place at the right time. Hope that eventually something will get some attention. So you just have to get out there and keep meeting and having great people like, do a state of the industry. I mean, it's a wonderful industry and I love it. Been in it since the 90s and all different ways. So thank you for putting all this together. Really enjoy it.
All y'all being here is a gift. And I am really heartened to know that there still seems to be both like a robust demand for you as creatives and for your work, and that you're finding ways to continue the creative process. You mentioned a few kind of specific examples of the way the industry is trying to integrate these sort of new safety precautions that we have to be mindful about. And I imagine people are really wondering how to balance, the need to be safe as much as possible with the sort of creative visions that you have and want to realize through your work. And so I was wondering if folks could talk about that from your perspective, and also feel free to riff on things that others have said since we've started this segment as well.
So I know for me, I love the idea of working French hours. I love the idea of this kind of 10 hours straight through. Even you can do what you got to do, versus kind of the stop and the start and the 12 hours. And, by the end of the night, it's just like, what's my name again? Who are you? Because as a director, I'm always trying to be cognizant of how my people feel. But around that 11th hour, some of those smiles get a little bit low. And so I think this idea of, again, kind of reimagining what our hours on set look like, kind of reimagining who really needs to be there, and, also reimagining the whole hurry up and wait of it all, like doing more hurry up and less waiting, figuring out how we can schedule things so we're not having people sit around for hours on end doing nothing. And we're really, really giving them, the most for their time on set, but we're also limiting exposure to other people. So masks are great, they're essential, but having somebody on set for 5 hours with a mask, they don't need to be there until maybe, halfway into the shoot. Again, just reimagining how we schedule things and being more strategic with that. And before I relinquish, Tia, I'm such a fan of yours, so it's so cool to be on the panel with you. I love the trailer, really beautiful work.
Oh, wow, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I was actually going to add to what Calvin was saying. I think for me as a director, what has been challenging, I have a feature in pre-production, and that creative freedom, trying to understand how to navigate should my actors actually touch. If there's a romantic scene, how are we going to film that? If there is a need for a crowd and I really need a bunch of extras, how do we do that? So I think that we're being challenged to figure out how to get around some of those issues as a creative. So while we do have additional time, I'll say it's been fun in pre-production. We haven't been rushing anything because we are not, we don't want to rush and get on set and then, have any issues. But thinking about when we do get to production, it's like, am I going to have to cut some things out, or how do we get around this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that was one of the good things that came out of the complete shutdown when everybody was home at the very beginning. I mean, it's really common for like a television series to only have a couple of weeks worth of prep, and sometimes when they start one episode, they're still finishing scripts on the next one. And so I think that when everything was really shut down and people knew that it was going to be extra complicated to bring crowds back together, they were kind of able to reread their scripts and comb through and be like, is this huge crowd necessary? Can we frame it just a little bit differently? I think a lot of the projects that initially came back were really trying to use environments that could be controlled. So maybe they're building more sets or using studios a little bit more than going on location. The other thing too is that it used to kind of be that you could have actors like come and go, and then maybe they're working on more than one thing. But like now it's like, get them in, get them for all of their work, and then you're done with them. Especially since with all of the delays and all of the postponements, we've seen a lot of complications as far as scheduling goes because of commitments that talent and even crew had further on down the line. So you're having to kind of like get lean and mean and streamlined. And anything that adds a variable is something that should really kind of be rethought. And so I do think that with the complete shutdown, people were able to do a lot more like rigorous planning and kind of plan to try to stick with that as much as possible.
And Heather, please, what's on your mind about this topic?
Yeah, I think we pretty much opened up in June. And for those of us that live in Dallas, that was pretty much when they started demanding the mask be worn at all times. So it was kind of, hey, you could open, but no. So I think the masks are, they're a necessary evil. And I work part-time at a salon, so it's become, it's just second nature now. And, you to it, but, except for, I guess when you are filming, there is a way that we could just have film a little bit closer away and make a few adjustments in the, the foot people not being quite so close together. Different angles and things in the filming and director view. So I think it's workable. I mean, and like she said, building sets, I think is a great idea instead of locations. So, yeah, I do agree. And I want to keep everybody safe. And I just want to get back to networking and seeing people in the flesh.
It seems like, recalling what you mentioned, Lindsay, about variables, right? The more variables you have, just the like exponentially more complicated it can become. And I realize that there's never enough time to have the rich discussion that we need and want. But I thought I would sort of gear us toward the wrap up with one last question. And I'm thinking about how some of what you said about this moment indicates that not all of the changes occurring are necessarily negative ones. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the future of the industry and how you're thinking about planning in the short and long term with all this uncertainty. I know that might be a difficult question, but what are your thoughts right now? And Calvin, I do know that you have to pop off right around 7, so I thought maybe we could start with you and then hear from others. And I think because we started late, we can also, run a little bit over.
Sure. And thank you for understanding. Sorry about that. A little conflict that's a real job. This isn't quite the real job just yet. But moving forward, I guess I'm cheating because I have never had enough money to have crowds. So I always write those 2 people in the conversation in my friend's apartment because I know that I can get 2 people in a friend's apartment. So I've always written to the scale of my budget, right, or to the scale of what I knew I could fundraise. So I think that the fun thing is now people are starting to create this kind of conversation, dialogue-based film because that's what we all can do. And the idea of the blockbuster or the big film of the year is going to have to change. And so where in like the 90s or the 2000s, you went from seeing kind of those really sweet movies like, Sleepless in Seattle, and those small kind of really interesting boy meets girl. They spend most of the time talking to each other unless they're at work for one scene to kind of give scope. And to make it bigger than it needs to be. And then you went to the Marvel Universe and the DC Universe. And I mean, everybody had a universe. And for a lot of indie filmmakers, we have like one star, and like it's a paper star that we made ourselves. And a lot of times industry people aren't looking for our paper stars. And now we're able to create content that is in the conversation with where we are. And people who are in the industry are having to kind of scale back this huge, massive production and make things about people talking about real things. And they're smaller, more intimate, projects. And I think now we're able to be more in conversation with what the mainstream is. And I think that's really, really important. So for me, I think that the future is very, very bright. I think that we have an opportunity to, get your skill set together. Now you can't just, put up 2 people talking in the cafeteria and not say nothing. But I do think that where it was bending towards these huge productions, I think that things are really starting to bend more towards the writer, director, filmmakers who are creating these small, intimate pieces about people living life together, because the big studios are having to do that. And you see that. Zendaya and John David did a one location picture for Netflix. There was another maybe like 5 people who did a 5 picture for Netflix, one location. They're very, very similar to what you've been seeing in independent films, what we show at film festivals. And now these huge juggernauts are doing the same thing that we've been doing for years, the same thing that they've not wanted, and they couldn't be distributed because it wasn't big enough. So now I think we're at a place where we can really take advantage of the fact that those are the kind of films that can be made safely and easily, as long as our skills are in alignment with their desire. I think we can really capitalize on that.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks for joining us. I know we have
Thank
to say
you.
goodbye, but we do still have a little time for other folks to think and guide us into this future of media making.
I was going to say, I agree 1000% with exactly what Calvin said as far as looking at it from an indie filmmaker's perspective as a director. We are going into a place where I don't want to say that it's going to be a level playing field because, money talks. And as an indie filmmaker, that's something that we don't have. However, we do have the opportunity to get our work out there, even more when it comes to the smaller productions. But I do have to say, or I often question as a fan, how the aesthetic for a lot of the shows or the films that I personally have fallen in love with, how those aesthetics are going to change. and what is going to happen to them moving forward. So, of course, as an indie filmmaker, it's ours for the taking at the moment. But again, as a fan, I have questions. I have questions about when is the next time I'll be able to go and safely sit in a movie theater and watch a film. Has that, kind of been taken away from me? Will I ever get to see my movie on a bigger screen and have that experience with the audience, watching something that I created? So I do think that there are also some negatives to it that we kind of have to be concerned about. So yeah.
I'm going to interrupt quickly. Oh, go on.
No, I'm so sorry. I was going to say, as far as planning for the long term, I'm honestly living day to day, month to month, because I have no idea what's going to happen at this point when it comes to the pandemic.
Which sort of echoes what Calvin said about, small budgets, taking it day to day. I wanted to say thank you for bringing that up, because our next segment is actually focusing on distribution and marketing. So I hope folks will continue to stay with us and learn from people in the theater industry. But before that, I would love for Heather and Lindsay for you to offer your thoughts as creatives and as people offering resources to creatives.
Yeah. Completely agree with what's already been said, and I will just also, not to kind of sing the same chorus, but it's also a lot easier for independent filmmakers to scale up. Those that are used to doing really big shows with really big budgets have a much harder time scaling down. So I think they're exactly right. It is a great opportunity for independent filmmakers. And something that was mentioned actually in the segment before this one is worth mentioning, about maybe dust off some of the older projects that maybe weren't as relevant in pre-COVID times, or maybe didn't quite strike a chord, and see if they maybe feel a little bit differently going into these times, just because we're looking at the world in a completely different way. And as far as resources for those who are looking to get back to work, TexasFilmCommission.com is our website. We've got a one-stop shop for all of our resources as far as what the parameters are for production in Texas, health and safety vendors if you need PPE or testing sites or compliance officers. We also have community contacts if you are going to be filming on location and you need to get in touch with some community reps to kind of understand how things are going in their communities. We can put you in touch with those folks. And we also have a registration process so that if things change, which they are on a pretty regular basis, we have a distribution channel to kind of let folks know when there's like different state mandates that might be applicable to their production. So.
Okay, good deal. All right. The Dallas Screenwriters Association, our website is DallasScreenwriters.com. And in fact, I think we even have the list of the production protocols on our when our meetings are, or our scene reads. So check that out, and especially the scene reads. Those are free to. And if any of y'all would like to come and just email like information or info@DallasScreenwriters.com, and I could comp you and get you into one of our meetings so you kind of meet some writers and see what we do and talk about. And we've got a director doing a table read on the 20th, so. And live and Zoom at the same time. So it's going to be fun. And again, thank you for putting this together.
Oh, thanks for making.
We want to get out there and spread as much education as we can.
Agreed.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I hope we continue this conversation. And I do want to honor, the Zoom fatigue that happened. So joining us toward the end of the week in the evening is really a gift. Thank you, Tia, Lindsay, Heather. I hope you'll stay with us for the next segment about marketing and distribution. And to lead us through that, Ebony will rejoin us to moderate that conversation. So thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ebony, I think you're muted.
I'm so sorry. You would have thought I have learned by now how to operate a live chat. But anyway, we are transitioning now to our last segment, which is our marketing and distribution discussion, which I feel is a very kind of hot topic, especially as that was probably the most impacted industry, are part of the film industry and entertainment industry through COVID. And we have wonderful leaders, local leaders who are going to join us in that conversation, and I'll introduce them. We have Barack Epstein. Barack began in the film industry via independent film production and film TV technology sales and consulting. As a film producer, Barack Epstein has completed 5 feature films, which have played at film festivals throughout the world. Barack has operated the historic Texas Theater through Aviation Cinemas Incorporated since 2010 as a leading cinema and events destination in Dallas. Barack also coordinates the cinema program at the historic Majestic Theater in downtown Dallas through Aviation Cinemas. In 2012, Barack co-founded the Oak Cliff Film Festival, which is headquartered at the Texas Theater. Barack is also the chairman of the nonprofit Top 10 Records, which reopened the historic record store in Dallas in 2017. We also have joining us James Faust. James Faust likes to rock and watch movies, not in that order. He began as the festival's senior programmer at the inception of 2016, where they were still called AFI, and it's now the Dallas International Film Festival. That position followed programming roles with the Asian Film Festival of Dallas, the Austin Film Festival, and Texas Black Film Festival. A diehard Raiders fan, James received telecommunication and theater degrees at Texas Tech University, which he followed up with a degree in cinema studies at SMU. He has served on juries and panels all over the world speaking about film festival management, programming, and marketing. And lastly, we have another James Wallace, traveling back in time. It all started when he saw Back to the Future at the multiplex as a kid. From there, James Wallace was mesmerized by the magic of movies. After graduating from the University of North Texas with a degree in media arts, Wallace got his start in the film industry with journalism, PR, and programming, working extensively with studios, exhibitors, and festivals. Wallace has since spent a majority of his career in exhibition, previously as a creative director for Alamo Drafthouse in North Dallas, and currently the Dallas-based Cinemark Theaters. Wallace has also worked on other side of exhibition and film distribution and marketing with the 40-plus-year-old legacy pop culture media brand film studio Fangoria. So welcome, James, and Barack to the conversation. So glad to have you all. Thank you for spending your time with us. I guess to start off this conversation, I just wanted to ask, how have you seen the film industry impacted by COVID-19?
Well, first of all, hold on. Can I say, James? I didn't know you, James Wallace. You're on Team Cinemark now. Is that what I just heard?
Yeah.
Well, congrats. That's great. Yeah. So what that tells you is that the exhibition industry is strong, and they're making strong hires in the local scene. Is what I'm hearing.
That's exactly what it means. And we would have you think nothing else.
That's great.
Disregard the fact that I'm drinking, it felt appropriate considering we're talking about the state of the industry and things are necessary.
But seriously, though, you're hearing about all these terrible things happening in exhibition and theaters are closing or hibernating is the word now that's being used officially by NATO. But theaters that are well leveraged like Dallas-based Cinemark can hire and make investments for the future, even if they're not making much money right this second. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, no, and I think there's that, and I think we're in an interesting, I think Barack, James, and I all come from, we're kind of cut from the same cloth, and that we come from the same place of we're from Dallas, and we've loved the movies, and we've been involved in the film community in a myriad of ways for our entire careers. And Dallas has always had a really interesting film community in that it was really disjointed, and it wasn't until we had things like the Dallas Film Festival and the Texas Theater and then the Alamo Drafthouse and these kind of clubhouse places where we could all come together. But within that, there was this inherent understanding that it was about coming together as a community and the experience. And certainly what like Barack does at the Texas Theater and what I did at Alamo, like I think now what we're seeing is that mentality throughout the exhibition industry in pop-up drive-ins, which all three of us are involved in different pop-up drive-ins right now in Dallas. Like I think that the theater is one of those things that I think we all have valued. It's not that we've ever taken it for granted, but we truly know what it's like now to go 6 months without it. I mean, I think I speak for all of us that that's the longest we've gone without seeing a movie. I probably see multiple movies in a theater in a week. And so it's like the Wild Wild West, and kind of to what Barack was saying, like it's time to get creative and figure out how we can get people back to the movies, and whether that's programming or a renewed interest in independent cinema and repertory cinema, featuring a lot of the types of films that we've been hearing from filmmakers tonight. I think that this is going to enter us into a period of kind of like an interesting renaissance for the movie theater. I hope so. I don't believe that it's going away ever. As somebody who can't imagine a world without a movie theater and has had to live with one for the past 6 months. So.
Yeah, it's been an awful pivot, if you will, into the world of virtual. I mean, I watch quite a few films annually online anyway, the nature of my business reviewing films, but I miss that theatrical experience. So the biggest shift for me, to James's point, is just not having that experience in a theater and having to go, okay, how do we still share the magic of film with all these people? And I know, like James said, we've gone to drive-in, like Dallas International and Dallas Film year-round. We've gone to doing drive-ins. We did a little bit of virtual early on, but the drive-in has been sort of that, hey, safe, communal vibe that you can get, that experience that you can feel, is going out and outside and doing it. And Barack, is sort of the nexus of all things film, because he's got a film festival and a theater and is running first run things. And so moving and has a business doing outdoor screenings. And didn't you do you're doing in your backyard pretty much, or the back.
We had a part. Yeah, we got I'm at the Texas Theater right now, everybody. But out the back that way is our parking lot, and we run movies out in the parking lot 2 to 4 nights a week. Sometimes we do them off site. Right now we are running a first run film, a film called Possessor, which is Neon's distributing. It's Brandon Cronenberg's new film. It's he's the son of David Cronenberg. It was a film I got to see at Sundance this year, and we were like, oh, this was going to be, what kind of movie is this going to be? And then it didn't get to play any of the other festivals that a film like this would normally play and get other buzz. But we're excited that we get to run some first run stuff outside in addition to repertory. Mostly what we're doing is repertory. But every night sells out. It's fun out there, and we're still adding stuff. So it's great. I actually are doing some screenings inside this month for the first time since March. So basically, we this October, we're kind of saying we're giving people different ways to experience the Texas Theater. We still have virtual programming. We have online programming, which we've been doing since March. We have a live streamed rock and roll show from the stage that we're doing here next Thursday night. And we've got our drive-ins that we've scheduled for the next month, and they'll go after that. But then we've also added a few shows that we do every year for Halloween. Couldn't quite figure out how to do them outside, so we're going to do them inside. Very limited capacity. This room seats 650. We're going to do 100-person capacity, so 16%, which is 34% less than the. Actually, I was about to say 34% less than the requirement, but they just changed the requirement to 75% yesterday. But we're nowhere near that. We're going 16. We're doing a live score silent film program on Halloween. We're doing a live ballet intro to A Nightmare on Elm Street. We've got the film that won South by Southwest this year called Shithouse by a Dallas filmmaker. And we're going to be showing that with the filmmaker here doing a Q&A. It's an IFC release. So we're mixing some stuff up. We're trying to get some 35 millimeter back up because obviously we have not been able to do 35 outside. So that's what's going to be happening here for the next few weeks.
I think what's great about everything we've seen during this time is obviously like there's been an element that we've needed it. You know, we were stuck inside for so long, and we had a renewed appreciation of content and our access to content. And I think that gave a showcase to a lot of independent films. But once we were able to kind of get back to things that were still socially safely distanced, like seeing the kind of this like new love of the drive-in and these pop-up drive-ins and even as something as simple as like what you guys were doing with the, like you could stop by and get popcorn
and the curbside snacks thing,
and like seeing the online streaming element that a lot of theaters had of these like kind of virtual theaters and what we're doing at Cinemark now with the private watch parties where people can rent theaters affordably and watch movies like Tenet in a theater, you know, if they don't feel comfortable being by themselves. Like, I think, again, we're seeing that like people need these experiences and nothing will ever replace being in a packed house on opening night of Star Wars or you know, whatever the latest like big movie everyone's excited about. But I think what we've seen is we've figured out a way to keep it alive so that we can get to the other side. And it's one of the oldest art forms that certainly we've grown up our whole lives having, and I hope it looks somewhat similar to how it looked when we came into this. I believe it will. But, you know, I think seeing like the creativity and innovation within it, and seeing the ability to kind of like bend and not break with that, you know, is it when other, you know, concerts, Broadway, stand-up comedy, like there's some major challenges there for those industries, and you know, they still haven't figured out a way to come back. I've been really like, just, it's like warmed my heart in a very cold, dark, sad time to see, you know, the ways that the community has figured out a way to still come together and watch movies. That's what it's all about.
Yep.
I did have a question as far as the adaptations you guys are making to your businesses. We're doing drive-ins now. We're doing just types of different ways to involve community in a very social, safe way. Do you feel those adaptations to your businesses or your organizations are going to last long-term, even after we settle from the pandemic?
Yeah, I can say for sure for us, as we get ready to launch our submissions. I know, Barack, I think you already launched your submissions for Oak Cliff.
No, we haven't yet.
All right. Well, we're thinking, and we're doing the same thing. We're going, look, we don't know what next year is gonna be. I mean, we have a good idea, but I think it's a safe thing to consider still having some sort of virtual. I mean, not to the extent that it was right now with all these full virtual festivals, but some sort of virtual. And we've always done an outdoor screening at DIF every year. There's always been some Saturday family thing. Well, with the drive-in success, I'm announcing it here. We're going to continue to do some drive-in stuff during the film festival next year. Because it just makes a lot of sense, and it's safe, and there's a lot of things you can lean into fun wise with the drive-in type of film. Like James, we used to work with Fangoria, and there's all these sort of schlocky fun horror films that you can put up on a screen that just feels like, oh, that's a drive-in movie. I'd love to show Texas Chainsaw again outside and actually have a chainsaw sponsor.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of the pop-ups that festivals, us included, would do up until recently were usually bring a lawn chair kind of pop-ups.
Yeah.
And now we've all changed to actual drive-ins. You stay in your car.
Yeah.
Which would have sounded crazy a year ago.
And you know, just a renewed appreciation for like the Galaxy, which is only 20 minutes outside of Dallas, but it's forever, and it's a true kind of hanger on from the original days of the drive-in. And I would encourage, if you haven't been out there, like Go out there and support them.
Go on a weekday, because on a Saturday you're going to wait in line for 2 hours.
Yeah.
It's hard to get in.
You're gonna be driving out like, I can't believe it. Yeah, it's crazy out there.
Coyote and Fort Worth, and those guys are kind of a newer, like, it's a little bit more of like an Alamo Draft House of drive-in vibe, but you know, it's great that we live in a place that even has drive-ins. There's places where people have been that have not gotten to experience those drive-ins during this time. So I think too that to see that people are supporting these efforts, that they're realizing that you know, whereas we may have thought like, oh, these institutions will always be here, we'll always have a film festival, we'll always have our our neighborhood independent theater. Like, you know, I think that through this experience and situation, it's put a lot of stuff in perspective of what's deemed essential and non-essential, and what's deemed, you know, safe and unsafe, and things that we thought would always be there aren't. And so I think it's been great to see within the side of us trying to be creative in this time is people supporting that. And I think that I want to believe, like, you know, I feel personally lucky now that I'm with you know, an exhibitor like Cinemark, and I grew up going to Cinemark, and I've always been a huge fan of the brand, and you know, I think that they will always have a place. But I think that there's such an importance of a range of types of theaters. Like, you have to have a Texas theater. Nobody starts out with their movie at, you know, no like band starts out playing at the arena. Nobody starts with their movie outside of a festival or outside of an independent theater.
James, are you trying to tell me that Cinemark will not be booking IFC's Shithouse in 700 screens on 1019?
No, I mean, you've gotten a lot more creative with independent programming, which is also been great to see that side of it. But what I'm saying is that, like, the things that have been really put in jeopardy are your independent institutions, your independent arts institutions during this time, and we have to have those. There has to be, and look, I'll say this. No one is sitting around when anyone announces that they're closing, celebrating, because it's not looked at as a competition. Like,
you're right.
It's mourned as a loss for all of us, because it's looked at as bad for all of us, because we're all, you know, like, in this because we love movies, and that's our business and our jobs. And so, you know, the unfortunate thing of, you know, having been with Alamo for so long, and the unfortunate thing of them now announcing yesterday that they're closing the remaining 2 theaters, we're seeing this kind of mid-level.
But it's temporary, James, right?
Right, it's temporary, but it's still one of those things that everything just feels so unknown that it's like, it's a real sign of the times. And so I think that, again, I think theaters are not going away. But I just think that it's important that we support them in any way we can to ensure that. And so, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if some of the bigger players like Cinemark return to permanent drive-ins. You know, Leroy Mitchell ran drive-ins as the original Cinemarks. You probably already knew this.
Yeah.
And a lot of you know, big time, you know, veterans of exhibition started in that. So especially now, why not put a, you know, Cinemark keeps going north. Why don't they just find a field and start a drive-in?
I mean,
you're already talking to them about this.
No, I will say that I am on this just speaking as myself from my own experience, and I speak for no entity that I've been involved with at all. But hey, man, I'm just happy to have a job right now. Okay,
that's good. That's good. But seriously, I think maybe we keep saying, what is the movie exhibition going to look like in a few months? And
right.
I feel like you will start seeing more permanent drive-ins. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's you know, as we go forward again into the unknown that is COVID recovery or COVID existence, we don't know, and what else is coming up next. And there's still, there was actually, before all this happened, and you guys kind of feel this, there was always, you know, what the films were spectacle. You know, like we're looking at tentpole films that were like going into like what's getting people back in the theater, because people wouldn't have a Quibi if there wasn't somebody wasn't thinking there was a drawback. Like people aren't going to the movies as much, and so drive-ins might be that next, but like what gets us out to that communal atmosphere? And I think the drive-in pivot is the way to go, or in the outdoor screens. And then just honestly, I think just feeling safe will be a flood of people whenever in 2022 or 2021, 2022. I think there will be movies for everybody and too much everything. Right now is a great time for independent cinema because those are the guys that don't have, like you're saying, Neon is doing things with you, Barack, and then I'm looking at A24 is doing some fun things. Like, look at how do we get these great products out, and with the relaxed Oscar rules, that things are a little easier. I think we're going to see a lot crazier things going in theaters and back and forth, a lot more. And I can't wait. I know you guys, you have to see Regina King directed One Night in Miami.
Yeah, Amazon's putting it out, right?
Yeah, Amazon. It's going to be in theaters, and I think it's Amazon first, and then in theaters.
I thought it was theaters first. I thought it was theaters Christmas Day, and then 2 weeks later or something. Am I wrong?
I thought it was a flip. I thought it was Amazon.
Maybe you're right.
Yeah, and then Christmas Day in the theater. So
all right.
Either way,
it's
something like that that's going to like, hey, forget this whole day and this window thing. We need to get the movies out there to people as fast as possible.
Speaking of which, what do you guys think? And I'm looking at James Wallace also. What do we think about? Is there going to be a major movie go day and date? And do we think so?
I think we have to have it.
I mean, everyone's saying, the rumor mill is WW84, right? So what do you think? Is it gonna punt? Is it gonna go day and date, or is it gonna go HBO Max $30?
Man, I think that the industry was already creeping, as we all know, the industry was already creeping towards that already, and this gave them the chance to really move towards that. And look, they've got their own best interests. They're sinking millions and millions of dollars into these movies, and so with testing the waters with certain movies that I think we would have called mid-level blockbusters or the shorter tent poles, if you will, that were holding up the sides of the tent and not the middle, like testing that. But going to the point of we've seen some bigger movies that I was surprised to go, VOD. So I think just broadly anything is possible at this point.
I mean, the big question is if it happens, the smaller players will go ahead and play them, and even the mid-sized guys. But Cinemark might not, or they might, that's the big, people are looking at Cinemark and AMC to see what they do when that happens.
Yes.
I will say too that when we do get to the inevitable, constantly moving other side of this, next year and the year after are going to be insane. Like it's going to be,
you're totally right, because whatever happens in the next few months, it could all be reversed, and then they go back to traditional stuff, right?
Jam-packed with movies and content from all the movies that have been releasing. We're going to see a really interesting 1 to 2 years that are just jam-packed with film after film. But from a exhibitor standpoint, it's getting to that point. There's no guarantee that just because you close down, that just means that you get to reopen back up when things are better. That's not how business works. But it's so it is one of those things of like weathering the storm and figuring out how to be innovative and creative and stay afloat. And everyone is trying to do it right now. And again, I mean, I don't think that there really is any. I think that people on the outside have this idea of the big guys and the small guys, but like everybody is just in the industry. Everybody, like especially in Dallas, everybody knows each other. Everybody's connected. Everybody just is doing kind of a different version of the same thing for different entities. And so everybody wants to see, again, we all got into this because we love movies and beyond movies, like we love the movie going experience and we love the theatrical experience. And so I think we're all just trying to figure out a way to like get to the other side of it in our own ways, and for some people that's a totally different struggle than it is for others. So
I had a question for Barack and James, leaders of film festivals. What advice are you giving to independent filmmakers who are traditionally going to your film festivals, but they are definitely changing the interface through this pandemic? So what advice are you giving to filmmakers and their strategy for distribution?
James, you take that one.
Honestly, it's funny because having to, it's because Brock did this too. When you planned the festival and you had all these films locking in, and you're thinking, oh, I'm doing this, and then having to call or email these people and say, it's not happening right now, or it's happening this other way. Here's your choice. It's been kind of difficult because the model has been, it's sort of this gentleman's thing where you don't have, your film shouldn't be playing, let's say, online or have played X amount of film festivals beforehand. And there's all these sort of unwritten and written rules to the film festival world and distribution. Well, these kind of gone out the window. And so we've been, and I don't know if you signed it, Barack, but there was this thing going around.
Steven Spark thing or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, you know what? Yeah, I'm in for this. I'm in for not going. You know what? You don't have to be a world premiere. You don't have to be a Dallas premiere anymore. I don't care if we say yes to your film. We're going to try to play your film. And so, to the fact that some of the films that we played last year are being released, I mean, that'll be up to their studios most of the time. But we're kind of keeping an open in. Like, look, man, we're going to try to make some space for some of the films that didn't play. If you still want to make that, I mean, Tribeca was trying to do the same thing. And going forward, new films, keep making them. There's going to be a film festival of some sort. We're going to have, whether it's online, drive-in, or something, next year, we're going to be doing something. So it's business as usual from that perspective. Just be willing to be flexible on how your film is getting on screen.
Got you. I did have a question for you to James Wallace. As far as with Cinemark and with the change of big blockbuster movies, Marvel not happening in theaters right now, do you feel there is a place for like independent, like original screenplay type of films, or do you still see that the market is more centered around these big franchises?
No, I mean, the thing that I'll say that I love about Cinemark and as a fan of the brand before and it being kind of this Dallas, it was like you grew up in Dallas and Cinemark was, in the age of like the multiplex into the megaplex, like Barack mentioned. I mean, it started from very humble places. Like it started in its own day as the same way that like an Alamo Drafthouse did, and it's grown out of being an innovator in an exhibitor. I mean, having like the One True IMAX in Dallas and having like a really like kind of innovative look at not only programming but technology and how to present a movie and different concepts and things like that. So I think within that innovation continues into the programming. And I think that like right now, it's kind of one of those things where I think, and you guys can speak to this, it's like tougher for independent film. And yet at the same time, because all of those bigger movies are moving, the independent content that is coming out is getting a little bit more of the spotlight. Whereas in a traditional sense, what we would see, and I saw this a lot at Alamo, was a lot of independent programming seems to be, the release schedule is looked at as counter programming to the big stuff. Mm-hmm. You are at an Alamo Drafthouse, or you are up from there, that's in a weird place because those types of theaters serve as both. They serve as both kind of the theater that you would go see, your A24 movie or your Focus Features movie or your Fox Searchlight movie. But at the same time, those are the ones that are really showcasing Disney movies and Marvel movies and Star Wars. You know what I mean? So I think that independent films are getting a little bit more of a stage right now. Because there's more room and there's more space and there's more of an ability to fill those programming spots.
And there's no Hollywood movies coming out.
Right, exactly. And so, what I think is great about that is hopefully there's I think that people are kind of taking chances on content more now too. I think the types of movies that people are watching, I think a lot more people nowadays are genre fans, like people that you would never imagine to be genre fans. We live in like a great renaissance of genre film where, you know, like, I don't think any of us would expect like some of like the A24 movies that were previously seen as more of a niche audience or an independent audience or a counterculture audience go as big as they have at the box office, or even something, you know, like the horror like programming that we're getting now. So I don't know. I think I hope that all of this leads to like a great kind of interesting renaissance of the types of films that are being made and the ways that we're showing them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, Brock, if you wanted to kind of wrap us up. I know you missed the other question, or if you have anything for this question.
I saw Tenet at the IMAX 17, Cinemark 17, and it was awesome. So Cinemark 17 has always been the place. That was, he's right. That was the very first, the one in Dallas that was not like in a museum, and it was like a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they ran 1570 per film. Do you know if I actually don't know, is the projector in the room, or is it only a digital IMAX in that booth right now?
I think it's in the room.
It's they wouldn't have pulled it out, right? That would have been a big project. So both rigs are in there.
Big.
Okay.
Yeah. I imagine so, because I saw
like did Dunkirk play in 15 there?
Yeah, I saw Dunkirk and it broke, and I had to walk out of there.
Oh no!
And they had to come back and fix it 20 minutes later. So I'm pretty sure it's in the room. Yeah, but that's where I see all the Nolan films.
I'm surprised that Tenet didn't play on film anywhere in town. I don't think it did.
I know when you texted me the other day, I was like, oh man, he's scheming. He's trying to get it so he can.
All right, I'll tell you guys. We're gonna play Tenet on film here.
Are you? Okay.
Look at that.
So if you're listening to this, I haven't posted it. We're gonna show it November 4th, 5th, 6th here on 35 millimeter. So I hope to be the #1 grossing theater on 35 millimeter in Dallas. That
there you go. I don't even think when you texted me the other day and you asked me if Alamo did, they didn't. That's another thing that we should talk about is, I think people walk into the movie, they buy their ticket if they haven't even bought it online yet these days. They have reserved seating. They walk in, they sit down. Like there's so much of the theatrical experience behind the scenes that are so a part of like making that magic that we all are lucky enough to have been a part of. And some of us, came up doing those jobs, but like, it's been a real dying art of 35 and 35 projection. And luckily we still have filmmakers like, Anderson and Nolan and Tarantino making movies on 35. And luckily we still have theaters, like the Texas that are able to show those movies on 35. But yeah, man, you're gonna be like you're gonna be probably one of the only theaters in the U.S. that show. I don't even think in Austin they did it on 35.
I looked it up. Somebody in Austin ran it on 70. The Highland in Austin ran it on 70.
Okay.
That was as far as the only Texas booking I could find on film at all.
That's a selling point right there. Do you have a screening tonight? Do you have a drive-in tonight?
Yeah, we're running Possessor. Screening starts at 8:30.
I'm gonna head over there right after this is over.
Come to the movie. And then we actually have one more show Saturday night, not sold out. So if you're dying to see some super gore on the drive-in screen, come see Possessor.
I will say this about Barack too. I've never, and James, tell me if I'm wrong, I've never seen Barack not at the theater, so I'm not convinced he doesn't just live like up in the booth sleeping on a bed of old movie posters.
Yeah, that's
it's like a Jedi projection when I see him outside of the theater.
Yeah. The only other place I've seen him is at the Galaxy Drive-In of all places.
Yeah, sometimes I hang out there. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for being online. Thank you for sharing your insight into this very hot button issue, but I appreciate your leadership, and I wish you continued success through this time. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Good to chat, everybody.
Together.
Yeah, thank you. So we are going to close out, everyone. Thank you so much for for just being here with us, being through this conversation. I hope you got some nuggets. You were able to take away some vital information on how to go through the different stages of production and financing and distributing your film. We do have some wrap-up notes. We have a Soul Talk coming up Sunday. Thank you so much, Agatha. It's going to be live on Facebook at 6 p.m. It's going to be our music Soul Talk with Nat Irving II and his sons Nate and Roman. So please join us for that. And also, let me play you a little video that will tell you about some of our program coming up. Again, if you are not a part of our mailing list, please make sure to go to dentonbff.com, join so you can stay updated for any future events, not only that the Institute hosts, but just the festival in general. We're so happy you can join us. If you are a filmmaker, we are still accepting films for our film festival. I believe our deadline is towards the end of this month. Make sure you check out our website, though, to confirm. Thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Stay safe, and all is well. Thank you, guys. Ooh, where